The 5 Phases of Atlantis. Alariel. To understand the development of Atlantean civilization, it is necessary to follow its progress through a number of eras or phases. The whole Atlantean period lasted from about 250,000 BCE to about 10,000 BCE, and during this period of time there were 5 main phases of development. First phase, 250,000 BCE to 150,000 BCE, destroyed by volcanic activity. Second phase, 150,000 BCE to 100,000 BCE, destroyed by the impact of a giant comet. Third phase, 100,000 BCE to 52,000 BCE, destroyed when the use of antimatter got out of control. Fourth phase, 28,000 BCE to 18,000 BCE, destroyed by the violent shifting of Earth's magnetic pole which led to an ice age. Fifth phase, 16,000 BCE to 10,000 BCE. This includes the Golden Age from about 14,000 BCE to about 12,500 BCE, destroyed by the shifting of the tectonic plates, which caused major earthquakes and tidal waves. All these dates are approximate. It should also be borne in mind that there was always a gap, in some cases many thousands of years, between a time of destruction and the establishment of a new civilization for the next phase. Hence, Atlantis was never inhabited during the total span of its existence from 250,000 BCE to the point of its final destruction in about 10,000 BCE. It could therefore be more accurately described as 5 civilizations inhabiting approximately the same area, although during the 5 phases the landmass of Atlantis went through major changes. First phase. Atlantis was a giant continent covering most of what is now the Atlantic Ocean. Second phase. The landmass had split into many large islands. Third phase. The area of ocean had increased, and there were now 5 large islands. Fourth phase. Only the high parts of the 5 islands survived. The rest of the land was flooded by the ocean. Fifth phase. Only 1 large island remained. In each of the 5 phases, the seeding of Atlantis was planned and supervised by the Intergalactic Council. The development of each civilization was closely watched and monitored, but in the case of 4 of these phases, the experiment had to be terminated by the Council. In the case of the 3rd phase, Atlantis was destroyed by scientific experiments involving the use of antimatter as a weapon. These experiments got out of control. It should be understood that when the Council reached decisions to terminate Atlantean civilization 4 times, these decisions were taken very sadly and reluctantly after examining all the available options. The angels who had overseen the day-to-day monitoring of developments on Atlantis were thorough in investigating possible solutions to the problems as they arose. But in the case of each of the 4 agreed terminations, these problems had become too severe to be corrected. During the first 2 phases of Atlantis, the land was prepared as an earthly paradise before the arrival of the new inhabitants. The angelic host, working with advanced technicians from other star civilizations, manifested ideal buildings and temples so that the incoming souls would have a perfect place for this spiritual experiment. During the first 2 phases, the new arrivals were mainly Lemurian souls, who were now becoming fully physical for the first time. A small number of advanced teachers from other star systems also came to provide mentoring, wisdom, and inspiration. However, the descent into physical life and the experience of sex had unforeseen consequences within the first 2 phases. The Lemurians had come from a subtle yet super-physical experience, and when they began to function as individual physical and sexual beings, they found this new experience very difficult. Many were overwhelmed by the intensity of this experience, and the addition of the turbulent emotions of envy and jealousy brought major crises at the level of the psyche. Faced with all of these difficulties within an unfamiliar framework of individual choice, many began to slip back into a group experience, something they had known in many lives on Lemuria. Now, however, they had a physical nature to contend with, and this led to many of the Atlanteans using sex as a group process that focused on performance and eliminated love and affection. This shifting of sex from a one-to-one loving relationship to a series of group orgies spread rapidly amongst the Atlantean population and began to develop violent and sadistic elements. When this bestiality became combined with sorcery, it was clear that the Lemurian souls were in danger of devolving rather than evolving spiritually. In these circumstances, the Council reluctantly recognized that termination of the experiment was the only available option for Phases 1 and 2. For Phase 3, the Intergalactic Council decided to take a different approach. Once more, a pleasant landscape including houses and temples was provided, but this time many volunteer souls were invited to come in from other star systems to add to the souls from the original Lemurian group. These new star visitors brought advanced psychic, consciousness-related, and technological abilities, which totally reinvigorated Atlantean culture and provided a new beginning. For a time, the experiment seemed to go well, but eventually the population of Atlantis split into two groups. The wise ones, who were intelligent, balanced, and loving people who lived in harmony and purity, and the degenerates, who were lazy, greedy, violent, and sex-obsessed. There was no real meeting ground between these two groups, and they came to regard each other with fear and loathing. However, this was not the only major problem that faced the Atlanteans of the third phase. The natural cycle of the evolutionary process produced over time large numbers of giant animals. This was partly the result of creating an ideal landscape without natural predators, who would keep any given species within some bounds of control. The landscape had been made perfect for the humans, but in doing this, the process of animal evolution had become compromised. Another development that had not been foreseen made the whole situation more complex. These giant animals began to respond to the violent feelings within the consciousness of the degenerate group. This changed their neutral pattern of behavior, and the animals became increasingly ferocious and aggressive. Attempts were made to fence in and control the giant animals, but these efforts were undermined by sabotage on part of the degenerates, who felt sympathy for these animals and saw them in some ill-defined way as possible allies in their struggle against the wise ones. After many desperate attempts to pen in the giant animals had failed, the Atlantean scientists, who by this time had benefited greatly from the advanced technical skills of the starseeds, came up with a bold solution. They had already been experimenting for some time with the interface between matter and antimatter. Now they proposed to develop this technology into a weapon to use against the giant animals. However, antimatter technology is notoriously difficult to control, which is why many star systems have banned it. Although the Atlantean scientists did manage to kill the giant animals, the experiment ran out of control, causing massive earthquakes and tidal waves which destroyed all human life. The Earth shifted on its axis, and Atlantis became 5 large islands, the remaining land being engulfed by the ocean. Then, in 28,000 BCE, the Intergalactic Council met and decided to reseed Atlantis for a 4th phase. Now, only the higher parts of the 5 islands remained, with the rest of the original landmass being flooded by the ocean. This time, most of the Lemurian souls from previous phases were transferred to other star systems, where they could be guided and mentored more effectively. The small number of Lemurian souls who volunteered to return to Atlantis were accompanied by large numbers of visitors from other star systems. The 4th phase was to be set up on an entirely different basis. The incoming souls were given a pleasant landscape but no buildings, and the need to work together in the construction of houses and temples bonded the new Atlanteans together for a time. However, eventually the same split emerged between wise ones and degenerates, and a mixture of technology and sorcery was used to control people. chaos replaced order, and Atlantis slipped into a long cycle of criminality, violence, and war. Once again, the Council decided to terminate the experiment. In 18,000 BCE, the violent shifting of Earth's magnetic pole led to an abrupt change in climate and the onset of an ice age. When the Intergalactic Council met to consider a fifth phase for the Atlantean experiment, they settled upon a very different structure with much greater supervision and control. Working through 12 advanced beings, collectively called the Alta, they set up the new Atlantis in 12 regions. Each region was governed by a high priest or priestess who was one of the Alta with sweeping powers and the backing of an effective administrative structure. Once more, volunteers came in from several galaxies, but this time only water, earth, and plant life were provided. As this meant a more extended period of cooperation was needed, the experiment got off to a better start. Eventually, a golden age of high spiritual and technical excellence emerged, a period that still stands as the high peak of human achievement. Sadly, the period of Golden Atlantis could not be sustained forever. Gradually, selfishness, greed, lust, and overwork crept into Atlantean life and overwhelmed most of the people. The followers of the Wise Ones, who maintained the knowledge that they were children of the light, tried to warn the rest of the people, but they were laughed at and scorned. A twisted society of shallow celebrity, selfish exploitation, and violent criminality emerged, working hand in hand with a very advanced technology that dehumanized people. Animals were overworked and exploited, and then new creatures, half human and half animal, were created through advanced genetic science. These mutants alarmed the angels monitoring Atlantean society more than any other development. An angel has an acute awareness of how physical beings fit into the structure of creation with regard to the soul. Angels know that all animals have a group soul with an angelic being responsible for its oversight. When an animal, through self-sacrifice or continued contact with humans, is able to graduate beyond this group soul, a new human soul is created. This pattern, animals with group souls, humans with individual souls, is an immutable law throughout the angelic world. But now angels were confronted with new creatures that were neither entirely human nor entirely animal. Should these mutants be given human souls or not? A deep level of alarm swept through the angelic host whilst down on Atlantis. Chaos was engulfing the land. The mutants, half animal and half human, were spreading increasingly complex and virulent forms of disease that had never been seen before, and for which even the skilled medical scientists of Atlantis had no answer. Meanwhile, the whole of Atlantean society was already sick for other reasons. The water had become polluted, and health was declining everywhere. Life for many Atlanteans had become a grim process of overwork, exploitation, inadequate rest, and heavy food. In these harsh conditions, alcohol and drug abuse became more and more common. People sleepwalked through their lives and forgot the feeling of love and the meaning of joy. Science and a hard, unforgiving technology dominated life, and creativity and spirituality were squeezed out. As Atlantis went into its final decline, illness, violence, and criminality dominated the society. In addition to these problems, the ever more bold and reckless Atlantean scientists were abusing crystal technology by developing enormous crystals as part of their energy program. Once a crystal reaches a certain size, its power increases dramatically, and the Atlantean scientists had not mastered the techniques for controlling these crystals. Worse still, they were beginning to experiment with a process for drawing power from the molten core of the Earth, a technology so dangerous that, should it be allowed to continue, it would almost certainly have destroyed the whole planet. Given these imminent dangers, the widespread chaos and breakdown of civilized life, and the firm objections from the angelic hosts on the mutant issue, the Intergalactic Council had no alternative. Atlantis had to be terminated, and the great experiment abandoned forever. In 10,000 BCE, the tectonic plates shifted, and the Atlantean landmass fragmented and crumbled down into a vast mass of mud, which would form a maritime hazard for many years to come. The final phase of Atlantis was over, and the golden dream of the highest and most spiritual civilization this world has ever known was now becoming a legend, a distant folk memory in the history of the human race. Atlantis in perspective. Alariel. When one sees only the outline of the Atlantean experiment, 5 phases and 5 abrupt terminations, it must inevitably seem like an elaborate failure. But if you look more deeply into the reasons for termination and the difficulties that had to be overcome, a different picture starts to emerge. From the very beginning, Atlantis had to deal with a very challenging situation. At the start of the experiment, the vast bulk of the incoming souls were relatively young souls with a limited experience, that experience being confined to etheric lives on the continent of Lemuria. None of these Lemurian lives would have prepared them for the very different experience on Atlantis. Here, for the first time, these young and inexperienced souls became fully physical and were faced with the whole gamut of physical sensation and the broad range of human emotions, including guilt, shame, hurt, and fear. This was so painful and confusing to souls who had floated through much gentler, superphysical lives within a group focus that many of them retreated into another form of group experience, the group experience of sex. However, this was a slippery path that led to spiritual devolution. It locked them into a process which steadily reduced their vibrational rate until they began resonating at subhuman levels. It was this process of degeneration into bestiality that led to the termination of the first 2 phases. But phases 3 and 4 also faced major challenges. The influx of large numbers of advanced star beings from across this and other galaxies transformed Atlantean technology, but it also intensified the split in Atlantean society, which polarized into the high-vibration wise ones and the primitive degenerates, and the Atlantean scientists, freed from the caution born of long experience on their original star systems, began to develop their technology into increasingly dangerous areas. The 5th and final phase tried to correct the previous imbalances by setting up a structure with much firmer leadership and control. Under the guidance of 12 advanced beings, this system did produce harmony and stability for a time, culminating in the Golden Age of Atlantis. Yet even here, the seeds of destruction were contained in the fabric of Atlantean society. These very advanced technologies began to dehumanize the population, which led in time to a split between the exploiters of this technology and those exploited by it. Pride in advanced scientific skills combined with ruthless greed led to the extensive abuse of the animal kingdom. That abuse reached its peak in the development of mutant forms, half human and half animal. And so the stage was set for the final termination of the whole Atlantean experiment. In coming to a final assessment of this great experiment, the individual good has to be weighed in the balance, alongside the evident failures of Atlantean society as a whole. On Atlantis, many souls experienced their most intense, creative, harmonious, and spiritual lives, which then contributed greatly to their soul growth. The era of Golden Atlantis continues to stand as humanity's greatest spiritual achievement and an inspiration to many souls who are now reaching up again towards the very highest frequencies of light and love. And when the Atlantean period was finally over, the knowledge was not lost. Well before the time of the final destruction, the great teachers of the final phase took their followers by ship to new locations across the globe. There they worked to seed the wisdom of Atlantis into new civilizations who would take the human story forward within a number of unique traditions. The Atlantean legacy remains a potent force in human development, because Atlantis is still an inspiration within the new consciousness. Thus, the spiritual harvest of Atlantis continues to serve humanity in its long pilgrimage, a pilgrimage which is now set to reach its climax in the transition of the earth and the triumph of the light.